What if the executioner's blade had not been the end? What if the moment the world believed Eddard Stark had been swallowed by death, death had simply given him back, not as mercy, not as miracle, but as something older and stranger than either word can hold? What if the old gods of the north, those silent watchers carved into ancient wood and rooted in the bones of the earth, had looked south across 1,000 miles of kingdoms and decided that the game was not yet finished? He opens his eyes. The cell is dark, the cold is absolute. And Ned Stark, Lord of Winterfell, Warden of the North, a man whose head had kissed the steps of Baelor's sept before the screaming of his daughters, that man draws breath, a full breath, an impossible breath. He does not move at first. He does not speak. The mind of a man who has lived his life by the methodical weight of duty does not collapse into confusion when confronted with the inexplicable. It calculates. He is alive. His neck bears no wound. He reaches up slowly, a deliberate gesture, fingers pressing against skin that should have been severed from everything below it, and finds only flesh. Whole, unbroken. He catalogs this fact without celebration. A living man with his head still attached is simply a man who has more to do. The memories arrive like a tide that does not ask permission. Every betrayal arranges itself into perfect, terrible clarity inside the architecture of his mind. Cersei, with that smile carved from cold marble and colder calculation, Littlefinger's hand steering the knife before Ned ever felt its angle. Joffrey on his throne, performing cruelty the way lesser boys perform tricks. Hungrily for applause. The Red Keep and its corridors of whispered allegiances, its poison loyalties, its truths buried beneath ceremony and silk. He remembers all of it. He remembers it with the precision of a man who no longer has the luxury of being deceived by sentiment. He sits up. The cell door is unlocked. He stares at it for a long moment. A lesser man might call it providence. A desperate man might call it a trap. Ned Stark calls it time. There is no enemy standing in that doorway. There's only darkness beyond it, and beyond the darkness, somewhere in this labyrinthine city, built on sand and ambition, his children are still breathing. That thought alone operates in him like a compass needle finding north, singular, unwavering, immune to storm. There's warmth in his chest, not the warmth of exertion or fever, but something quieter than both. Something that sits behind the sternum like a coal that refuses to extinguish. He does not know its name. He does not require its name. He recognizes its texture in the way a man born among weirwood trees recognizes the silence before something ancient moves. The old gods do not speak in words. They speak in heartbeats, given back without explanation. He finds a guard slumped near the far wall, sleeping too deeply for a man on duty, breathing in long, heavy pulls as though the gods have been at work in this corridor too. Ned removes the man's cloak with careful hands, efficient hands, the hands of someone who understands that every motion now carries strategic weight. He does not take the sword. A sword is conspicuous. A sword announces itself. He has no interest in announcement. He wraps the cloak around his shoulders and moves to the doorway. He pauses there exactly one breath and looks back into the cell that was meant to be the last room he ever knew. He commits nothing to sentiment. He turns forward. The passages beneath King's Landing are not the passages men write ballads about. They are not the grand halls of Maegor's Holdfast, or the sunlit galleries of the Tower of the Hand. They are the city's forgotten arteries, narrow, salt damp, smelling of old water and older decisions. and Ned Stark moves through them the way a man moves who has been paying attention his whole life to the kind of spaces power does not bother to watch. He thinks in corridors the way commanders think in terrain. He does not hurry. Hurry makes sound. Sound makes consequence. He thinks of Arya first. She is the blade that needs finding before someone else picks it up. Small, quick, furious, and somewhere in this city still wearing her face and her rage as though both are armor. Then Sansa. And here, the calculation carries a different weight, a heavier one, because Sansa is visible in a way Arya is not. Sansa is in a room with a name, attended by eyes that report to golden hands. Reaching her requires subtlety of a kind that does not come easily to a man built from direct speech and open fields. But he is no longer the same man who knelt in the yard of Winterfell and taught his sons that honor was the straightest road. He is the same man wearing that truth, but he has passed through something that stripped the naivety from the lesson without stripping the lesson itself. Honor can be quiet. Honor can move in shadow. Honor does not require an audience to remain honor. He reaches a junction in the passage where 3 tunnels branch into darkness, and he stops. He listens. Somewhere above him, King's Landing is waking up. Somewhere above him, the Red Keep is already deciding what story it'll tell about the man whose head rolled yesterday. They do not yet know the story has changed. He stands at the junction for 3 full breaths. No more. A man who has already died once cannot afford the luxury of hesitation, and yet he must be certain, because the passages beneath King's Landing branch and rebranch like the roots of a weirwood, and a wrong turn here does not mean embarrassment. It means discovery. It means a second death, this one permanent, this one without the strange mercy of a second dawn. He chooses the middle passage. What if the most dangerous man in Westeros is not a king, not a general, not a sorcerer, but simply a man who knows what happens next? What if foreknowledge, stripped of everything else, stripped of titles, armies, the Stark name itself, is still enough to move the entire board? Ned Stark walks through the dark beneath the capital of the 7 kingdoms, and he carries no sword, no banner, no seal of office. He carries memory. He carries the map of what went wrong, and in the cold logic of what is coming, that is more than enough. The passage brings him to a low door framed in old stone, and behind it, he hears nothing. He pushes through. The man waiting in the small vaulted chamber beyond is bald, soft-bodied, dressed in robes the color of a bruise at twilight. He holds a candle. He does not drop it when he sees who steps through the door. This, more than anything, tells Ned Stark something important about Varys. That even in the face of the genuinely impossible, the man's first instinct is to keep the light steady. The silence between them stretches for a long moment, taut as wire. Then Varys speaks, and what he says is not an exclamation, not a prayer, not the breathless stammering of a man confronted with a ghost. What he says is measured, almost clinical, as though he has already begun moving pieces he had thought removed from the board entirely back into their positions. He says that he received the cipher message. He says that he did not believe it. He says that he believes it now. Ned tells him there's no time for the courtesies of disbelief, and something shifts in the Master of Whisperers. Some small recalibration behind those careful eyes, a reassessment conducted in the space between one breath and the next. This is not the Ned Stark he managed and maneuvered and quietly mourned as an asset squandered on righteousness. This is something else wearing that face, something older and colder and considerably more difficult to predict. Varys has always preferred predictable pieces. He studies this one with renewed and cautious attention. What Varys offers first is Essos, a ship, a new name, a city across the narrow sea where Ned Stark the dead man becomes someone the living world has no record of. It is a sensible offer. It is the kind of offer a man of extraordinary resource makes when he wishes to control what he cannot fully understand, to relocate the problem to a geography he can manage. Ned listens to all of it. He does not interrupt. He waits until the offer is complete, and then he declines. He does not finish the explanation. He does not need to. What Varys provides instead, because he is, above all things, a practical man who measures the value of information by what it can still accomplish, is the intelligence Ned came for. Arya is gone from the Red Keep. Gone as in vanished, as in even Varys's network of small eyes and quiet ears cannot place her with certainty inside the walls of the city. She is somewhere in King's Landing still, he believes, wearing the city like an anonymous coat, moving through it with a ferocity that disguises itself as smallness. Ned absorbs this and lets it settle. Arya in the Wild City is Arya alive. Arya he can find later when there are more pieces on the board working in his favor. Sansa he cannot reach yet. That much is confirmed now, given weight and precision by Varys's account. She is attended constantly, surrounded by eyes that belong to the Lannisters, and only nominally to herself. She is a hostage dressed as a ward. Ned knows this. He files it alongside everything else, and does not allow the knowing to become feeling. Not here, not yet. What stops his breath for a different reason is the final piece of intelligence. Robb's banners are marching south. Of course they are. Of course the boy raised on Honor's lessons, and his father's example, has done the precise thing Honor demanded, called the North, raised the direwolf, and pointed himself toward the sound of his family's destruction with the magnificent, terrible straightness of a man who has not yet learned that straight lines in Westeros have a habit of ending at a wall. Ned knows what comes next. He knows every road Robb takes south, and he knows which one does not bring him home. He turns to Varys and names what he needs. Not a ship, not a new name. A raven sent in cipher to Robb's camp carrying a single sentence. A sentence no forger could invent, no spy could construct from rumor. A sentence that exists only in the memory of a father and a son standing before the ancient face carved in a weirwood tree at Winterfell, speaking an oath between themselves in the gray northern light, witnessed only by a god who keeps no court records. Varys is quiet for a moment, and the candle he holds does not waver. He asks what the sentence is. Ned tells him. The raven arrives before dawn. If you're enjoying this alternate history of Westeros so far, please consider subscribing because I upload new stories every single day. Now, let's continue with the story. It comes down through a sky the color of cold iron, dropping into Robb Stark's camp somewhere in the middle of the long march south, and the boy who receives it is not yet a king, not yet a name that men will say with that particular quality of reverence and grief that attaches itself only to the very young and the very doomed. He is simply Robb, a son, a brother, a young lord with his father's gray eyes and his mother's red hair, and a wolf at his heels that has not yet learned to be afraid of anything. He breaks the cipher alone, which is a mistake he will not repeat, and the words inside do what words almost never do to Robb Stark. They stop him completely. He does not call for his mother immediately. He stands for a long moment in the gray half-light of his command tent, holding the parchment as though it might dissolve, reading the sentence again and again. The sentence is not long. It is not clever in the way that clever men construct cleverness, layered, deniable, designed to mean two things at once. It means only one thing. It has always meant only one thing to the two people who ever spoke it. On a morning in Winterfell, when the world was still a place where Eddard Stark did not die in the shadow of a great sept, with his daughters watching. Robb's hand tightens on the parchment. He does not finish whatever thought begins behind his eyes. He does not need to. Catelyn finds him like that, and she understands before he speaks. She is a woman who has spent a lifetime reading the silences of Stark men, who learned in the long winters of her marriage that the men of Winterfell carry their truest feelings the way the North carries its cold, deep and structural, and never quite gone, even in summer. She crosses the tent and takes the parchment from his hands with the quiet authority of a woman who has never once in her life had the luxury of her own collapse. She reads it. She reads it again. Her face does not change in the way that lesser faces change. No flood of relief, no breaking open of grief held too long. Something simply settles in her, the way stone settles, finding its final weight. She says his name is not on the parchment. The sentence is not signed. And Robb says, very quietly, that it does not need to be. What follows is not an argument and not a celebration. It is a council, held in the blue dark before the camp's fires have properly caught, attended by lords who are accustomed to hard news and hard men, and who receive what Robb tells them with the careful measuring silence of people who understand that new intelligence is not always intelligence you can explain. He tells them nothing of the cipher, nothing of the sentence. He tells them only that what they believe they knew has shifted. That patience at this moment serves the North better than advance. The lords of the North are not pleased. Patience never pleases men who have already committed their names and their swords and their sons to a march. But they know Robb Stark's face by now, and the face that looks back at them across the firelight does not invite negotiation. The army halts. The word spreads through the camp in the way that all such words spread, partly as order and partly as rumor. And by the time the sun has fully risen, the march south has paused, suspended on the edge of its own momentum, like water at the lip of a stone. In King's Landing, Ned does not yet know the Raven has landed. He is occupied with the particular discipline of a man who has chosen method over desperation, which is perhaps the only real choice available to someone operating inside the capital of the realm that has already publicly killed him. Varys's network reaches everywhere. This is not a metaphor. The Master of Whisperers has spent decades weaving a web of obligation and information through every layer of the city's life, from the great houses to the tanner's district, to the women who sew the small council's robes and carry their thread through gates that soldiers do not think to question. The seamstress's name is not important. What is important is that she has worked inside the Red Keep for 11 years, that she is invisible in the way that all truly useful people are invisible, present, necessary, overlooked, and that she walks the same corridors every morning and every evening, past the same guards who have long since stopped seeing her as anything other than furniture that carries linen. she delivers what Ned asked for without knowing she has delivered it. A floor plan, rendered not on parchment, but in a sequence of details. Which doors open inward, which stairs are lit, which turning in which corridor passes closest to the suite of rooms where Sansa Stark sleeps under the watch of men sworn to a boy king who sits her beside him at court, like a warning made flesh. Ned studies what she has given him, the way he once studied maps of campaign, not searching for the obvious route, but for the gap, the seam, the place where the pattern interrupts itself. Varys has found it, near the Street of Steel, where the smell of the Forge district drifts over the lower walls, and the King's Guard rotation has a blind point, a gap of perhaps 12 minutes, occurring on the third day of every court week, when the procession of petitioners moves through the Eastern Passage and the guards shift to manage the crowd. 12 minutes is not long. It is also not nothing. Ned spreads the floor plan across the stone floor of the narrow room where he has been living in near total silence, and he begins to draw lines between points with the quiet, absolute focus of a man who spent a lifetime believing that honor was its own strategy, and who has now learned at considerable cost that strategy requires a different kind of honesty, not the honesty of declaration, the honesty of precision. He does not plan to storm the Red Keep. He is under no illusions about what a single man, still visibly dead as far as Westeros is concerned, can accomplish against the Lannister household guard with a direct approach. What he plans is smaller and therefore more dangerous. Not a rescue in the manner of songs, swords drawn, and torches flaring in the dark, but a removal. Quiet, deliberate, timed to 12 minutes, and a blind spot, and a seamstress who does not know what she has already done. He works through the night, which is where most of his nights now live. There's one problem he has not yet solved, and he knows it, and he turns it over in his mind with the methodical patience of a man who has learned to distrust solutions that arrive too easily. Sansa. She will not know to expect him. She believes, as all of Westeros believes, that her father's head now decorates a spike above the city that took it from him. He cannot send word ahead. Any message that reaches her through conventional means risks the very people he is trying to circumvent. He needs Sansa to see him and not scream. He needs her in the span of a single heartbeat to transform 12 years of a daughter's certainty about the nature of the world into something flexible enough to follow a dead man through a Kingsguard blind spot and out the Eastern Passage into the smell of the Forge district. He needs, in other words, something that the floor plan cannot give him. He is still working on this when the candle beside him reaches its end, gutters once, and goes dark, and somewhere in the upper reaches of the Red Keep, in a room that is comfortable enough to be a cage, precisely because comfort makes the cage feel optional, Sansa Stark turns in her sleep toward the window, toward the city that has already taken everything from her, and does not yet know that the city has not finished its accounting with the Starks. The procession moves through the city like a wound that has been taught to celebrate itself. Joffrey's justice, they call it. The banners are gold and crimson, the crowds thick with people who have learned in the months since the Stark execution that enthusiasm is a form of survival. They cheer because cheering is what the city requires of them. And in their midst, arranged along the processional route in the pressed gold cloaks of the city watch, stand men who are also performing vigilance, performing loyalty, performing the uncomplicated confidence of those who have nothing to conceal. One of them is not performing. He stands at the edge of the route near the third fountain, where the avenue narrows just enough that the litter carrying the hands ward must slow, where the outriders bunch together and lose their formation for exactly 11 seconds. 11 seconds was what Varys told him. Count them, Lord Stark. Count everyone, and do not move before the 9th. Ned counts. He has spent 11 days moving through this city like a ghost wearing a borrowed face, and he has learned that the most dangerous thing a man can do in King's Landing is act on impulse. Impulse is what the city is designed to provoke. Every gilded surface, every carefully staged humiliation, every procession exactly like this one. They are all engineered to produce reaction, to make a man reach for his sword at precisely the moment when reaching for his sword will destroy him. Ned Stark reached for his sword once. He knows, with the clarity that only the axe's edge can teach, what that costs. So he counts 8, 9. He does not look directly at the litter. He looks at the space 4 feet to its left, and he trusts the peripheral vision that 3 decades of a soldier's training have made into something almost inhuman in its precision. The curtain is blue. She is behind it. He knows she is behind it because Varys's woman confirmed it this morning in a baker's stall near the Gate of the Gods, passing the information inside a bread roll he did not eat. He knows everything he is supposed to know. What he does not know, what no floor plan and no intelligence network can tell him, is what his daughter's face will do when it finds his. 10. The litter slows. 11. He steps forward, pressing into the small gap between an outrider's horse and the litter's frame, close enough to smell the leather and river mud of a gold cloak's honest working life. His left hand finds the curtain's edge. His right hand holds the folded cloth. 3 words, pressed into the weave with a needle and dark thread, because ink can be read by the wrong eyes, and fabric cannot be intercepted at a raven's tower. The words are not eloquent. They do not need to be. Father lives. Trust Loras. 6 syllables to reverse a world. The curtain opens the width of a hand. Sansa Stark looks out. What happens next is something that political theory cannot adequately map, because it occurs in a register beneath strategy and above instinct. In the pure animal layer, where a child's nervous system recognizes its parent before the mind has finished formulating the question. Her eyes find his face. He watches the recognition detonate behind them, watches everything she is trained to suppress surge upward with the force of a river that has just had its dam removed. And this is the thing that breaks something open in his chest, quietly, without announcement. She closes the surge back down, in a single breath, with the practiced control of someone who has spent months learning that visible feeling is a liability in a court, where every emotion is a vulnerability to be cataloged and used. She is 12 years old. She should not know how to do this. She takes the cloth from his hand without looking down. Her fingers close around it with the steadiness of a woman 3 times her age. The curtain falls back into place. The litter moves on. The outrider's horse shifts left, and the gap closes, and Ned Stark steps back into the line of gold cloaks like a stone resettling into a wall. He breathes. He counts again, this time not seconds, but paces, measuring the distance to the eastern gate and the turning that takes a covered litter away from the processional route and toward the maester's quarter. He does not know yet what she will do with what he has given her. He does not know, cannot know, whether the shock of seeing him will hold her together or fracture the composure she has so carefully constructed. He knows his daughter. He knows her gentleness, her courtesy, her love for songs and the ceremonies of southern courts. He does not yet know what King's Landing has built in the spaces between those things. What architecture of endurance has been quietly raised behind her eyes while Westeros looked away? He is about to find out. The litter reaches the eastern gate 40 minutes later. He is already there, standing in the shadow of the arch, wearing a different cloak, gray wool, flea bottom, anonymous. The crowd around the gate is the usual press of market traffic, forge workers and merchants, too minor for the processional. Nobody looks at a man standing still. In King's Landing, stillness reads as belonging. The litter slows, stops. From inside, it comes a sound, soft, controlled, the particular pitch of a young woman in distress. And then, the low, urgent voice of a handmaid calling for assistance. And then, the curtain opens from the inside, and a girl in a handmaid's dress steps out supporting another figure. And the figure is small and wrapped in a travel cloak and moving too quickly and too deliberately for someone who has genuinely fainted. The handmaid catches his eye for exactly the length of time required to confirm the exchange. Then, she turns back toward the Red Keep with the expression of a woman whose mistress has been safely delivered to a maester and whose conscience is entirely clear, having been, as consciences in this city often are, carefully and expensively arranged. The cloaked figure reaches him. She does not speak. He does not speak. Her hand finds his beneath the folds of her cloak and closes around it with a force that is not gentle, a force that contains everything that cannot be said in a gateway arch with Lannister guards 30 feet behind them, a force that says, I knew, and I didn't know, and you are real, and I will not let go. And also, beneath all of it, something harder and less childlike than he expects, something that has been waiting. He holds her hand and moves, and she moves with him, and the flea-bottom crowd absorbs them both with the indifferent mercy that only truly large cities can provide, swallowing them whole, closing over their passing like water over a stone, leaving no record of their going except the faint disturbance in the air where a dead man and his daughter walked back into the world together. The Lannister guards at the eastern gate do not notice the absence for another 6 minutes. By the time they do, the procession is still moving, the crowd is still cheering, and somewhere in the Forge district, pressed into a doorway that smells of coal and iron, a father is looking at his daughter's face in full light for the first time, reading in it the record of everything he missed, and understanding with a cold and clarifying dread that what she has become in his absence may be the most valuable and most dangerous thing in the entire game. She is still holding his hand. She has not yet loosened her grip. The court does not learn of Sansa's disappearance all at once. It learns in pieces, the way a body learns of a wound. First a numbness, then a wrongness, then the slow and terrible comprehension of what has been lost. A handmaid notices the empty bed. A guard notices the unlatched window. A steward notices the absence of the girl at the morning meal. And the information travels upward through the hierarchy of the Red Keep with the reluctant momentum of a stone rolling toward a precipice, each servant passing it to the next with the instinctive understanding that whoever delivers it to Cersei Lannister will pay some portion of the cost simply for being present when she receives it. She receives it in her solar, at a window overlooking the bay. She does not scream. She does not weep. She does not overturn the table or shatter the goblet that she is holding with a stillness so precise it looks almost contemplative. She sets it down, she turns from the window, and the coldness that moves across her face is something qualitatively different from anger, something quieter and more permanent, something that has considered consequences and found them acceptable. Joffrey, who enters the Solar minutes later full of bluster and inherited appetite for spectacle, takes one look at his mother's expression and goes still. He is not a perceptive boy, but he is, when it matters, an animal, and animals know cold. "They say Stark lives," she says. She does not say it as a question. "Rumors," Joffrey answers. "Common people, peasants who don't know? Rumors carry armies," she says. "Find Varys." They do not find Varys. What they find instead is an empty chamber, a cold hearth, and on the table at the center of the room, a folded piece of parchment bearing a single line of text written in 3 distinct languages: High Valyrian, the common tongue, and a third script that none of the king's advisors can immediately identify, though several will spend uncomfortable hours trying. The line means nothing in any of its 3 versions that they can determine. Or perhaps it means everything. This is, by design, impossible to say. Varys has always understood that the most destabilizing message is the one that cannot be decoded. The absence of meaning creates more anxiety than meaning ever could. He has left a riddle because a riddle does not end. It persists. It follows the reader into sleep. Cersei has him declared a traitor before noon. The declaration requires no Varys. That too is by design. Across the keep, in a smaller and considerably less comfortable room that he has occupied by calculated choice rather than necessity, Tyrion Lannister reads the news with the expression of a man watching a fire he did not start but has long expected. He reads it twice. He sets it down. He picks up his wine and does not drink it, because drinking would mean his hands are free, and his hands are doing what they always do when his mind is working, moving across the surface of the table in small deliberate patterns, as though tracing a map that only he can see. Ned Stark lives. This is the central fact. Everything else is commentary. Tyrion is not a sentimental man by practice, though he is by nature, sentiment having been trained out of him by a father who confused hardness with intelligence and a family that confused cruelty with strength. He does not permit himself to feel the relief that moves through him like warm water, the complicated gladness of knowing that a man executed for honor has not, in the end, been extinguished by its absence. He does not permit this because he cannot afford it. What he permits himself instead is clarity, cold, methodical, almost mathematical clarity. If Ned Stark reaches Robb Stark's camp, the Northern Army transforms. This is not a military assessment alone, though the military dimensions are considerable. It is a moral assessment. Armies fight for many reasons: fear, loyalty, gold, the simple momentum of having started. But an army that believes it fights for a man who died unjustly and walked back out of death, that army fights for something older and less rational, and therefore more dangerous than any of those things. It fights for proof that the world can still correct itself, proof that the right side can win even after it has already lost. This is the most powerful thing a banner can carry, and Robb Stark's banners will carry it with a force that no number of Lannister riders can simply outpace or outmaneuver. Unless those riders reach Ned Stark first. Tyrion sets down his wine. He has not drunk any of it. He considers this for a moment, then drinks it after all. because some thoughts require the small comfort of familiar sensation before they can be fully held. In the Great Hall, Cersei is composing a letter to Tywin. The letter is long. The important part is 3 sentences. She is moved with characteristic efficiency, past grief and past fury, and into the territory beyond both. The cold arithmetic of restoration, the calculation of what must be destroyed to preserve what remains. Stannis must be broken faster than planned. Forces must be redeployed. And Ned Stark, who has already died once for the sin of inconveniencing her family, must be found on whatever road he is traveling and brought back to King's Landing in chains, breathing, intact, presentable. She wants him to kneel again. She wants the city to watch him kneel again. And this time, she wants to ensure that what follows is not survivable. The letter goes out before the afternoon bell. It travels faster than rumor, which is the only advantage she still holds. In the courtyard below, Gregor Clegane is already moving toward the stables. He does not walk quickly. He does not need to. 300 riders are being assembled around him with the quiet efficiency of men who understand that speed is required and who have learned not to ask questions about destination or method. The mountain does not share his instructions. He does not need to. His instructions are written in the way he moves, the unhurried, massive certainty of something that has been aimed rather than dispatched, the specific gravity of a man who has never needed to hurry because nothing has ever successfully run from him. The order is clear. Take the man alive. This, in its own way, is the most frightening version of the order. A man sent to kill can be outrun or outwitted. A man sent to kill quickly can sometimes be discouraged by cost. But a man sent to take alive, sent by someone who wants the theater of another execution, who wants the symbolism of a second kneeling, who wants to demonstrate that not even death itself can protect you from the reach of the throne. That man does not stop. He cannot be bargained with. He cannot be satisfied by a lesser outcome. He has a specific task and a specific prize, and he will move across the landscape between here and that prize with the patient, implacable momentum of weather. Tyrion watches from a high window as the riders form and begin to move. He counts them without meaning to, a habit older than conscious memory, the compulsive accounting of a man who has always known that other people's strength is the primary geography of his world. 300, well-mounted, moving north by northeast at a pace designed for endurance rather than speed, which means whoever planned the route expects the quarry to be far rather than close. He turns from the window. He sits. He thinks about the road between King's Landing and the north. Every inn, every way station, every fork where a man traveling with a girl could go wrong or go right. He thinks about the people on that road. He thinks about who else might be watching it. He thinks about a letter he could write and does not write, and continues not writing for a long and careful moment. Then he reaches for parchment. He does not yet begin, but the parchment is in his hand, and the quill is in the other, and the candle is lit, and he is sitting very still with the expression of a man who has located the exact point where the right thing and the wise thing briefly occupy the same coordinates, and who understands that such moments do not last and must be acted on before they separate again. The quill touches the page. The forest trails that parallel the King's Road are older than the road itself. They were made by deer and by the people who hunted deer, by travelers who understood that the obvious path is often the most dangerous one, and they wind through the dark between the trees with the patience of things that have never needed to announce themselves. Ned Stark knows these trails. He has ridden them in youth and in grief and in the ordinary business of lordship, carrying dispatches north when the road was thick with travelers he had no wish to meet. He knows where the ground softens near the river crossings and how to read the canopy for weather 3 hours before the sky confirms it. He rides now with the posture of a wool merchant, which is to say, he slumps slightly, speaks to his horse in the rough vowels of a man whose concerns are ledgers and market days, and watches everything with eyes that do not look like they're watching anything at all. Sansa rides beside him. This is the wound that does not announce itself in any dramatic fashion. It does not bleed in the way that wounds are supposed to bleed. It simply aches continuously in the manner of a break that is set wrong. The sight of his daughter on horseback in a plain gray cloak, her red hair tucked beneath a rough-spun hood, her face arranged into a careful stillness that no girl of 13 summers should have learned to arrange it into. She was sharpened in captivity. This is the only word that fits. The girl who once cried over a traveling singer's sad ballads has been replaced, or rather refined, burned down to something with edges. She listens when he speaks of Jon's parentage. The whole truth of it, Lyanna and Rhaegar, the Tower and Dorne, the name that Ned has carried alone for 14 years like a stone inside his chest. And she does not weep. She absorbs it. She considers it. She asks, after a long silence, what it means for the succession. And the question is so precisely the right question that Ned has to look away into the trees for a moment, because the answer requires composure. He tells her about Cersei. He tells her what he knows and what he suspects, and the point at which the two become indistinguishable. He tells her about the gold and the blood, what Joffrey is and what Joffrey is not, and what that truth costs the realm in human lives if it is handled wrongly. She listens to all of it with that terrible new stillness, and when he is finished, she says quietly that she had suspected some of it, not the particulars, but the shape of it. The shape of the lie, she says, was something she had begun to feel even before she could name it. And Ned thinks, she is 13 years old. She is 13 years old, and she learned to read the shape of lies while imprisoned in a tower above the city of her captivity. And the world did that to her, and the world is not done. He does not say this aloud. He rides. He thinks about what she will inherit if the war is won, and what she will inherit if it is lost, and whether there is a version of either outcome in which a girl who has learned to detect the shape of lies before she can name them gets to set that skill down and simply rest. He does not find the version. He rides on. He makes, in the privacy of his own thoughts, a vow. Not the formal kind, not the kind spoken over swords in candlelit rooms, but the kind a father makes in the dark while watching his child ride through a forest, the kind that costs nothing to speak because it is never spoken. The world she walks out of this into will not require such hardness, not if he has anything to say about it. He holds the vow quietly and keeps riding. The fourth night descends on them near the inn at the crossroads, which they do not approach. They know better. Varys's man, a quiet, colorless person named Ryam, who has the useful quality of appearing to be nobody in particular from every angle, had warned them 2 days prior that the inn would be watched. Not officially, not by the city watch or anybody whose presence could be questioned. Watched by men in plain clothes with good horses, and the patient eyes of people who have been paid to be patient. Ryam does not say who paid them. He does not need to. There is only one man in the Seven Kingdoms who deploys patience as a weapon so methodically and so expensively. Ned reads the terrain instead. He reads it the way he once read troop positions in the field. The narrow defile where the trail bends back toward the creek. The overhanging bank that would channel mounted riders into single file. The stands of old oak on either side that would hold archers without exposing them to the road. He has 6 men in addition to Ryam. 6 is not a great number, but 6 men in the right positions in the dark, on ground they have chosen themselves, against riders who believe they are the hunters. 6 can do considerable damage to 30 before 30 understands what is happening. The mountain's riders come at the 2nd hour past midnight, which is the hour that Ned expected them. The first signal is the sound of hooves on soft ground, the careful sound of horses being walked rather than ridden, which means the riders believe they are approaching something unaware, which means they have already lost the essential advantage they thought they were keeping. Ned is standing in the dark behind the overhanging bank. He can hear Sansa behind him, further back, motionless. She does not make a sound. He did not ask her to be silent. She simply understood. The riders enter the defile in the shape that narrow ground enforces. Single file, tightly packed, unable to spread laterally. Ned waits. He has always understood that patience is not the absence of action, but the precise timing of it, the knowledge of which moment is the one moment that cannot be improved upon. That moment arrives, as such moments always do, without ceremony. The first arrow speaks, then the second. Then the dark comes alive with sound. It is not a battle in the way that battles are named and remembered. It is a lesson in geometry. The geometry of prepared ground versus unprepared men, of elevation and angle, and the compounding chaos that attends soldiers who cannot see where the threat originates. The mountain's riders are not cowards. Several of them are demonstrably brave, pressing forward through the first volley in the way that trained men sometimes press forward because training overwhelms terror. But bravery requires a direction, and there is no direction available to them, only the dark and the narrow ground and arrows arriving from positions they cannot triangulate. They take their losses. They consolidate. They retreat. The sound of them receding through the trees is the sound of a calculation failing, the sound of a plane that was built on incorrect assumptions about where its quarry would be and how its quarry would behave, and which discovered those incorrect assumptions too late to revise them. Ned moves through the abandoned baggage in the minutes after, methodical and unhurried. Most of it is provisions and equipment. The ordinary materiel of men expecting a long pursuit. One saddlebag is different. One saddlebag is heavier than the others, with the particular weight of documents rather than supplies, and inside it, wrapped in oilcloth against the weather, is a letter. It is not sealed with the Lannister lion. It does not need to be. The hand is precise and familiar to anyone who has ever received a formal communication from Casterly Rock, and the contents. Ned reads them once in the thin light of a shielded lantern, then reads them again. The contents describe troop movements in a detail that is not consistent with a letter meant for field commanders. This is a letter meant for someone who directs field commanders, a coordinating document, a letter that describes not just where the Lannister forces are, but where they are going and in what sequence, and with what objectives, and by which routes. He holds it carefully. He thinks about his son. He thinks about a boy commanding in the field without complete knowledge of what he is opposing, making decisions in the dark because that is what the dark requires of you. He thinks about what this letter puts in Robb's hands, not just intelligence, but the exact shape of what is coming, the geometry of the Lannister campaign laid out in the precise hand of the man who designed it. Ryam appears at his shoulder without making a sound. "We cannot ride north fast enough," Ned says, and it is not a complaint, but a calculation, a problem already in the process of being solved. But a single rider can. He looks at Ryam. Robb needs to see this before the Lannister forces reach the fords. Ryam takes the letter. He looks at it without reading it, in the way that a man looks at something he is being asked to carry rather than understand. "There is a Maester's post," he says, "at Sharer, 3 hours east." Ned considers this. 3 hours east is movement away from their route. Movement away from their route risks exposure, but the letter in Ryam's hands contains the kind of information that reshapes campaigns, the kind that converts a son who is fighting blind into a commander who can see. He weighs this. He does not weigh it long. "Send your fastest man," Ned says. "With a copy only? We keep the original." He pauses. "And Ryam." Ryam looks at him. "The copy goes as wool prices. The maester at Sharer will know the cipher." He watches Ryam's face for confirmation, and what he sees there does not surprise. It is the expression of a man who serves a master who prepared for exactly this contingency, which means Varys knew this road, this inn, and this maester's post long before Ned found himself standing in a dark forest holding a Lannister general's letter, which means something important about the reach of the man who is, for the moment, on their side. The rider departs east into the dark. Ned watches him go. He folds the original letter and places it inside his own coat against his skin, where it will stay until he can put it in his son's hands directly. They move north before dawn. Sansa is already mounted when he reaches her. She asks him nothing about what he found. She asks him instead how far they are from the neck. They move through the gray hours before morning, when the world holds its breath between night and day, and the road ahead reveals itself only one step at a time. The neck falls behind them. The northern air changes, sharpens, fills with pine and frost, and something older, something that belongs to men who were born knowing the names of rivers. Sansa rides without complaint. She has not complained once. There is a quality to her silence now that is nothing like the silence she carried south to King's Landing, which was the silence of a girl trying to become smaller. This silence is inhabited. She is thinking. Ned watches her from the corner of his eye and understands, with the particular ache of a father who has had to learn everything twice, that the girl who left Winterfell is not the one riding beside him now. The camp announces itself before it appears. First, the smell of wood smoke and horses, then the distant sound of iron on iron, the low murmur of 10,000 men conducting the quiet business of existing in a field, then the pickets who raise their spears and then lower them, not because they are ordered to, because they see his face. What happens next moves through the camp the way a stone moves through still water, in rings that widen until they reach every shore. A rider gallops inward, then another. Then at the edge of the command tent, the gray wind raises his enormous head from the earth and makes a sound that is not quite a howl. Something older than a howl. Something the old gods might have used before they fell silent. And Robb Stark, who has been awake since before the sun and carries the particular exhaustion of a young man holding a war together with his bare hands, steps out into the gray morning light and sees his father. He does not speak. There are no words that exist for this moment. He crosses the distance between them at something that begins as a walk and does not remain one. Ned catches him. He holds his son, his eldest, the boy who was 3 years old when Ned last saw the world clearly, who is now a man with a sword at his hip and mud on his boots, and the weight of 20,000 northern lives in the set of his shoulders. They stand in the mud, the Lord of Winterfell and the King in the north, and around them the northern lords, Umber, Mormont, Karstark, Glover, sink to their knees without a word spoken between them, without a command given, reading the moment the way men who still believe in something read signs. The old gods have sent him back. There is no other explanation that fits. There is no other explanation they require. Ned does not let the moment last longer than it is permitted to last. He is, above all things, a man who understands that sentiment and strategy cannot share the same hour when lives depend on the hour. He pulls back, grips Robb's face in both hands for one breath, reads his son's eyes, and then says, quietly, that they need every Lord Commander in the war tent before the sun clears the tree line. Robb nods. He does not need to be told why. He is. Ned notes with a pride he tucks away for later, already thinking. The letter comes out inside the tent, unfolded on the map table between the candles, and the room changes. What has been a reunion becomes a war council, which is what it must be. Ned lays out what the letter contains. The flanking force, the eastern column, the timing, and he lays it out the way Tywin Lannister would lay out a trap, which is to say, he lays it out as a thing already decided, already in motion, already halfway to completion, because that is precisely what it is, or was. The lords lean over the map, they study it, they understand. Several thousand northern soldiers are alive in this tent who would not be alive tomorrow if not for this piece of parchment. The counter-strategy comes quickly, the way true strategies do when they have already been half-formed in the mind of the man proposing them. Feigned retreat along the eastern road. The Lannister cavalry, confident and overextended, following the bait into the Whispering Wood, where Robb's archers wait in the canopy like a held breath. There is something almost elegant about it, the trap becoming the trap's own undoing. And when Ned looks at Robb's face across the table, he sees his son has already seen the geometry of it, already calculated the angle, is already 3 moves ahead. Which is when Ned understands, fully and without reservation, that whatever he has to teach this boy, the boy has already begun teaching himself. The war council ends, the plans are given, the orders go out. And then Catelyn arrives. She comes through the tent flap still wearing the dust of the road from the twins, and she stops. She looks at her husband. Her face does this thing that faces do when a person has prepared for loss so thoroughly that presence becomes a kind of violence. She does not weep immediately. She is too still for that. She crosses to him and takes his hands and looks at them, his hands, as though confirming that they are real, that they are made of something solid enough to trust. Later, in the private dark of the tent, with the sounds of the camp muffled and distant, Ned tells her, he has carried this truth for 14 years. He has carried it the way men carry things they know will one day need to be set down, and that day has arrived with the particular heaviness of all long-delayed things. He tells her about Lyanna. He tells her about the Tower of Joy and what he found there and the promise he made to a dying girl who had his eyes and their father's stubborn heart. He tells her that Jon Snow is not his son, that Jon Snow is the last Targaryen, that the blood of the dragon runs in the veins of the boy they raised in Winterfell. Catelyn listens. She does not interrupt. When he finishes, the silence between them has a texture. The texture of something enormous settling into place, finding its weight, determining what it will require of the people who must now carry it. She does not weep from jealousy. She wept for that years ago alone and put it in a room and locked the door. She weeps now for something larger and harder, the staggering consequence of what this boy is, what his existence means for every war already being fought and every war not yet begun, for Robb's crown and the North's cause and the delicate architecture of everything they are trying to build while the South burns. Ned says her name. She lifts her face, and in the low light of the candle, he can see her moving through it, through the grief and the weight of it, arriving somewhere on the other side that is not peace, but is at least resolve. She asks him one question, the most important question, the only question that matters now. She asks him what they are going to do about it. He opens his mouth to answer. Outside, the camp stirs. A horse shouts in the dark, and then, closer, the sound of a rider coming in, fast from the eastern road. Too fast at this hour for any message that is welcome. The rider's message is not welcome. It is, however, expected. Ned reads it standing, still in the low candlelight, Catelyn at his shoulder, and his face does not change because he has already moved past the possibility of surprise into the harder country of preparation. The Eastern Column has advanced ahead of schedule. Tywin has pushed his outriders through the Riverlands faster than any Lord's intelligence suggested he would. And the window, that narrow, careful window, has compressed by nearly a full day. Robb must move now, or the valley will be wrong, the light will be wrong, the trap will be a trap only in the architect's mind, and nothing at all on the ground where men will die. He does not deliberate. He writes the order himself, seals it with his own hand, and sends it back with the rider before the horse has properly caught its breath. What follows is a kind of controlled thunder, the camp folding itself in the dark with the practiced quiet of men who have been told they may speak only in whispers, who understand that sound travels through a valley the way water travels through stone, finding every crack. Catelyn watches him go. She does not ask again what they are going to do. She has seen the answer. The valley is called the Next Tooth by the locals, a name that serves its geography honestly. It narrows at both ends and rises sharply on either side. Rock faces that are not quite cliffs, but close enough to funnel anything that moves through the center into a lane perhaps 40 yards across at the widest point. Robb has known about it for a week. The archers have been in position since the previous evening, hidden in the scrub and the gray stone, cold and still, waiting with the particular patience that northerners have always had for difficult things. Grey Wind is held back behind the western ridgeline, and the horse that holds him is shaking from the effort. The feint is the thing. The feint is everything. A smaller Stark detachment makes itself visible on the eastern approach. visible in the specific way that suggests disorder, a retreat with something panicked at its edges, horses pulling wrong, formations ragged at the joints. It is performed panic, meticulous in its dishevelment, and it works the way Ned knew it would work, because Tywin Lannister's eastern column is commanded not by Tywin himself, but by Sir Kevan, who is a capable man, a careful man, but not a man who has spent his life accounting for the possibility that what he sees might be theater. Kevan orders the advance. The column enters the valley at pace. The arrows come from both sides simultaneously. The first volley so precise in its coordination that it sounds almost like a single note struck on some enormous instrument. The flanks fold. The horses in the center do what horses do when the world suddenly becomes wrong in every direction at once. They compound the chaos, turning what was a column into a knot, and Grey Wind is released, and the wolf is an instrument of pure psychological devastation, and the thing that follows is not a battle in the traditional sense, but a kind of reckoning. It is over quickly. That is the mercy of a well-designed trap. It does not require duration. Kevan Lannister is taken unhurt, dismounted and disarmed in the settling dust, and he stands in the aftermath surrounded by northern guards with the particular stillness of a man who is doing arithmetic, counting what he's lost, calculating what position he now occupies, beginning the uncomfortable work of deciding how to proceed without the presence of his brother to tell him what thinking is permissible. Ned comes to him as the light changes, as the valley begins its slow work of growing quieter. He does not come with ceremony. He comes alone, or nearly alone, and he sits across from Kevan on a stone and speaks to him without preamble in the way that men speak to one another when both of them understand that performance would be an insult to the moment. What Ned offers is not mercy exactly. It is something more honest than mercy. It is consequence clearly described, humane captivity, comfort and dignity. His sons return to him in time, if things unfold as they should. In exchange, the truth, not Kevan's version of the truth, carefully shaped to minimize his family's culpability, but the whole of it, signed, witnessed, legible to any lord who might sit in judgment. The nature of Joffrey's birth, the death of Jon Arryn, and the hands that arranged it. Kevan looks at him for a long time. Without Tywin, the architecture of his loyalty has a different shape. Without Tywin, there's no voice in the room telling him what is owed and what is not, what can be admitted and what must be buried. He agrees. He does not take long to do it. The document is drafted before nightfall, signed in Kevan's own hand, witnessed by Robb and two of his most trusted lords. It is a small piece of parchment for the weight it carries, the weight of a crown's legitimacy, the weight of a dead hand, the weight of every lord in the 7 kingdoms who has been waiting for something solid enough to stand on before committing to a side. Within a fortnight, the news has moved faster than armies ever move. A rider reaches the Tully seat at River Run and is welcomed with a formality that has teeth in it now. Real teeth, the kind that come from renewed certainty. Dispatches reach the Reach, and certain lords there, men who have been watching the Lannisters with the careful neutrality of those who hedge, begin composing letters that do not yet commit to anything, but are tilted unmistakably in a new direction. And then, arriving in Robb's camp on a gray morning, a message from a source no one expected to hear from quite yet. The seal is a crowned stag, black and clean. The language inside is terse to the point of coldness, because Stannis Baratheon does not soften language any more than he softens anything else. But the substance of it is this: that Ned Stark's survival, his survival, and the testimony now attached to his name, changes the question of who sits the Iron Throne in ways that Stannis has been turning over with the relentless machinery of his mind since the first word reached him. It does not pledge support. It does not offer alliance. But it acknowledges, in terms that are precise enough to be meaningful, that the conversation is no longer the same conversation it was before. Robb reads it twice and hands it to Ned without speaking. Ned reads it once. He sets it down on the camp table between them, and he places a stone from the ground on top of it, so it does not move, and he looks at his son, and his son looks back at him, and the silence between them has the quality of two men standing at the edge of something vast, understanding that the ground beneath their feet is still ground, but that it is very close to the edge of being otherwise. Outside, the captured lords are being catalogued and housed. The dead from both sides are being seen to with whatever dignity the field allows. Grey Wind has returned to Robb's side and sits enormous and quiet, his yellow eyes moving across the camp with an attention that seems almost deliberate. There is still the matter of the raven. There is still the matter of what Stannis actually wants. Ned picks up the letter again. What if the most dangerous letter Ned Stark ever reads does not come from an enemy? What if it comes from across the narrow sea, sealed in black wax pressed with a three-headed dragon, carried by a man who has survived every court in the known world, precisely because no court has ever fully understood what he is? Varys moves through Pentos like smoke moves through a room, present everywhere, locatable nowhere. He has been in the Free City for months now, gathering threads, pulling carefully, rebuilding the web that King's Landing burned away from him when the world tilted and Ned Stark refused to stay dead. His little birds reach into places that armies cannot. They whisper into ears that swords could never touch. And when the moment comes, when the intelligence he has been assembling finally reaches its necessary density, Varys does not waste it. He walks into the camp of Daenerys Targaryen, and he places before her a truth that rearranges everything. She is not the last. The proof is careful, meticulous, the kind of documentation that only a man who has spent decades preparing for contingencies would have thought to preserve. A letter from Lyanna Stark, written in the Tower of Joy in the final hours of her life. A sworn testament from two members of the Kingsguard who stood at that door and understood what they were protecting and why. Names, dates, an account of the annulment and the secret marriage written in a hand that Daenerys' own maester cannot dismiss. Jon Snow is Aegon Targaryen, son of Rhaegar, son of Lyanna. The blood of the dragon and the blood of the wolf joined in a child who has been living his entire life as a bastard of the North, ignorant of what runs through him. The silence in Daenerys' tent, when Varys finishes speaking, has the quality of a held breath that the whole world is taking together. She sends him out. She keeps only Missandei and Jorah, the two people whose counsel she trusts, not because they are strategic assets, but because they are hers, genuinely hers, in the way that very few things in her life have ever been. And for 3 days, Daenerys Targaryen does not act. She thinks, she walks. She sits with her dragons in the early morning when the light is gray and the sea moves quietly below the cliffs, and she watches them and lets herself understand what the revelation actually means. before she decides what to do with it? What if a conqueror, in the moment of being told her claim is complicated, chooses alliance over war? What if she looks at the threat from the north, the cold, ancient, inhuman thing moving south beyond the wall, and understands, with the particular clarity that comes from having seen civilizations crumble from the outside, that a rival claimant to an iron chair matters considerably less than the survival of every living person in Westeros? The letter she sends is measured, careful, written in her own hand and sealed with her own seal. It acknowledges Ned Stark not as a subject, not as a lord petitioner, but as a power. It offers dragons against the long night. It asks for Stark ships, Stark soldiers, Stark credibility among the northern lords who will not follow a foreign queen across water without a northern voice beside her. The terms are conditional. The framing is proud, but the essential offer is real, and both sides will know it. The Raven reaches Robb's war tent on a morning when the ground is wet from overnight rain, and the camp smells of mud and wood smoke and the particular exhaustion of men who have survived something large. Ned reads it standing. He reads it again. He hands it to Robb without commentary and watches his son's face move through several expressions in quick succession. Surprise, calculation, a flicker of something that might be awe, and then the hard, focused attention of a commander assessing an unexpected development on a battlefield he thought he understood. What Ned does next is the thing that his lords will argue about for years. He does not celebrate the offer. He does not reject it. He calls his senior commanders into the tent, lays the letter on the table, and says, in the tone of a man who has already reached his conclusion and is offering others the opportunity to reach it with him, that he intends to accept, on one condition: a great council. After the wars are finished, after the long night is met and broken, after the dust of every conflict has settled enough to see the ground beneath it, a great council of the lords of Westeros, convened to confirm whatever ruler the realm accepts by reasoned consent, not by conquest, not by lineage alone, by counsel, by the old mechanism, older than any single dynasty, through which Westeros has in its history occasionally managed to govern itself with something resembling wisdom. The tent goes very quiet. Lord Bracken says it is madness. Lord Mallister says it is unprecedented. Robb says nothing, which means he is thinking, which means he has not decided whether his father is brilliant or impossible, and suspects he may be both at once simultaneously. Ned holds firm. He holds the way stone holds, not aggressively, not with force, but with the simple, implacable quality of something that has already decided it will not move. The condition goes into the reply. The reply goes into the sealed message. The message goes onto the fastest ship Robb's fleet can find. And now they wait for a dragon to answer. The lion does not retreat gracefully. That is the first thing to understand about what happens next. Tywin Lannister has spent a lifetime constructing the image of a man who moves only forward, who absorbs the blows of lesser enemies the way a castle wall absorbs arrows, not flinching, not yielding, simply enduring until the arrows run out. But arrows do not run out when the quiver belongs to half a continent, and what Tywin faces as he pulls his eastern forces westward toward the capital is not a siege. It is a reckoning, and reckonings, unlike sieges, cannot be outlasted. He rides in silence. The men around him know better than to speak. There's a calculation happening behind those cold eyes that has been running without interruption for days. processing losses the way a treasurer processes debts, not with grief, but with the clinical precision of someone who needs to know exactly how deep the hole is before he can begin to think about climbing out of it. The hole, he is beginning to understand, is very deep. The Eastern Army is diminished. The river lords have closed behind him like a door. And to the north, something has changed in the fundamental texture of the war. He can feel it the way old soldiers feel weather in their bones. Something has shifted, and the shift is not in his favor. He reaches King's Landing before the worst of it reaches him. But the worst of it is already there, waiting in the form of a sealed document that has passed through 30 pairs of hands on its way south from Harrenhal, each pair adding its own silent testimony to the weight of what it carries. Ned Stark's words, read aloud before 300 assembled bannermen in the great shattered hall of Harrenhal, carry further than any army. They carry the way truth carries when it has been suppressed long enough, explosively, filling every space that fear had previously occupied, finding every crack in every wall. Joffrey's birth, the lineage, the names that should have been spoken and never were. Ned had written it plainly, without venom, without theater, in the measured language of a man who understands that plain statements of fact require no ornamentation to be devastating. 300 men hear it. 300 men carry it outward in 300 directions. And the Lannister bannermen, who had pledged themselves to the Golden Lion and its authority, begin to ask the question that loyalty has always feared most. What precisely are we loyal to? The fractures do not announce themselves with drama. They appear as silences, as delays, as messages that arrive slightly later than they should, written in language that is slightly more careful than it needs to be. Tywin reads each one and understands each one with the full terrible clarity of a man who built a dynasty on the perception of strength and knows, with absolute precision, what it looks like when that perception begins to fail. It is Tyrion who moves first, and this may be the great irony of the Lannister story, that the son Tywin least regarded, the son he kept at arm's length with casual contempt for 30 years, is the one who sees with perfect clarity what must be done and has the will to do it while there is still time to do it cleanly. Tyrion does not make speeches. He does not issue ultimatums. He simply assembles the evidence, item by item, the way a careful lawyer assembles a case, and he places it before Cersei in a room where there is no one else to perform for and nowhere to run. He tells her what the city faces. He tells her what the walls will not stop. He tells her what happens to capitals that burn, not abstractly, not as distant history, but concretely, specifically, street by street, the way someone who has read everything and forgotten nothing describes a future he has already mapped in complete detail. And then he goes quiet, which is its own kind of eloquence. He does not finish the argument. He does not need to. Cersei, for a moment, is simply a mother in a room with her brother. The performance falls away. The queen, the regent, the player of a game she has been playing since girlhood. All of it falls away, and what remains is a woman who understands, perhaps for the first time without the armor of ambition, that the game is over, not paused. Over. She asks him only one question: whether Joffrey will live. Tyrion tells her yes. She closes her eyes, and then she does the hardest thing she has ever done, which is nothing. She simply sits and allows events to move around her, and does not reach out to stop them. The small council convenes in emergency session with a notable absence at its head. The vote, when it comes, is not close. The gates of King's Landing open before dawn, negotiated terms intact, soldiers standing down with the careful stillness of men grateful to be given a reason not to fight. Joffrey is escorted to his chambers by men whose loyalty now runs through different channels, and the boy king, 17 and furious and bewildered by a world that refuses to behave as he has always believed it must, is placed behind a door that locks from the outside. Tywin receives the terms in writing. He reads them once. He does not argue. He does not rage. He signs his name in the small, precise hand of a man who understands that the value of a strategic retreat lies entirely in its cleanliness. You leave nothing behind that can be used against you. You yield what cannot be held, and you preserve what remains for whatever comes after. Casterly Rock. His life. The name at least endures, even stripped of its titles. He accepts these terms the way he accepts everything, without visible feeling, which is its own kind of feeling, recognized only by those who know what to look for. And then Ned Stark walks through the gates of King's Landing. He comes without banners. He comes without ceremony. He comes on foot, which no one expected, which is perhaps precisely why he chose it, because the unexpected entrance is the one that lodges itself in memory, that refuses to be forgotten, that becomes the image people reach for when they try to explain what something felt like. His boots find the cobblestones of the city that condemned him, and he walks through streets that have gone strange and quiet, crowds forming not with the noise of celebration, but with something more complex than celebration, something closer to disbelief, meeting recognition, the particular human sensation of watching an outcome occur that should not have been possible, and understanding, slowly, that it has. He walks to the Sept of Baelor. He does not look at the scaffold that still stands in the plaza, though everyone watching understands that he knows exactly where it is. He walks up the steps and through the great doors and into the cool shadow of the Sept itself, and he moves to the altar of the Father, the aspect of the seven, whose domain is judgment and whose symbol is the scale, and he kneels. He says nothing. The Sept fills with silence the way water fills a vessel, completely, leaving no space for anything else. Priests who had begun to speak find they cannot. People who followed him in from the street stand with the peculiar stillness of those who understand that something is happening that does not require their assistance. Ned kneels at the altar of judgment in the city that judged him, and he offers neither prayer nor accusation, only presence. The simple, implacable presence of a man returning to the place where something was taken from him, not to take it back, but to stand in that place and breathe and be alive in it. How long he kneels, no one afterward can quite agree. Long enough for the crowd outside the Sept to grow, word traveling through the city the way all remarkable things travel, faster than it should, carried by the energy of people who need to tell someone else what they have just seen. Long enough for the light coming through the high windows to shift slightly, marking the morning's passage. Long enough for the silence inside the Sept to become its own form of ceremony. Then a child's voice, from somewhere in the back of the crowd that is spilled through the doors and stands packed along the nave. High and unself-conscious, and carrying the particular authority of those too young to have learned to stay quiet in the presence of the unspoken. The warden lives. 3 words, and then the Sept is no longer silent. The cry moves outward from the child who spoke it the way a stone moves water. In rings, in waves, each ring larger than the last, rolling out through the doors and down the steps and into the plaza and through the streets, finding voices, finding lungs, finding the chests of people who had spent a year and a half learning to speak carefully and discovering in this moment that they no longer have to. The warden lives. The warden lives. Ned does not rise immediately. He hears it. He remains kneeling at the altar of the Father while the city rolls the cry outward like a tide and does not move until the sound has fully taken hold, until it belongs entirely to the people making it and no longer needs him to sustain it. Then, slowly, he rises, turns, faces the doors and the light and the thousands beyond them. His face, those who are close enough to see it, will later describe differently, because faces at moments like this reflect as much as they reveal. Some will say he looked tired. Some will say he looked peaceful. Some will say he looked like a man who has paid a price so enormous that no subsequent payment will ever feel significant again. Catelyn, who has reached the bottom of the sept steps through some combination of urgency and the crowd's instinctive parting before her, looks up at him and sees something none of the others can name, because it does not belong to politics or strategy or the great movements of history. It belongs only to them. He begins to descend the steps, and somewhere in the crowd, visible at its edge, a raven is spotted perched on a rooftop above the plaza, jet black against the pale morning sky, still as stone, watching with the particular quality of attention that makes men who notice it feel briefly uncertain whether it arrived by chance or appointment. No one sends it away. No one reaches for it. It simply watches, and the city moves beneath it, and the cry keeps going. And in the distance, beyond the walls, beyond the bay, something vast is in motion. The dragon has not yet answered. 6 months is both a long time and no time at all. Long enough for the dead to be mourned and the living to begin making arrangements. Not long enough for the arrangements to feel anything less than provisional, fragile, suspended over an abyss by the collective willingness of men who distrust one another to pretend, for now, that they do not. 6 months since the plaza. 6 months since the raven watched from the rooftop. 6 months since the dragon did not answer. And now the great wheel has turned to this. Harrenhal, sprawling and cursed and enormous, its towers melted by dragonfire into shapes that look like something a giant dreamed and then regretted. Its halls wide enough to swallow armies. Its history thick with enough blood that no single house can claim it as an advantage. Ned chose it deliberately. He chose it because neutral ground is not merely the absence of advantage. It is the presence of a particular kind of dread that everyone shares equally. No one is comfortable at Harrenhal. That was precisely the point. The Great Council convenes on a morning when the sky over the Riverlands is the color of old iron, and the banners of every great house hang from the ruined battlements in the cold air, snapping and shuddering as though uncertain of their purpose. They are all here, Stark and Lannister, Tully and Arryn, Tyrell and Martell, the direwolf and the lion in the same hall, separated by a table long enough that neither must acknowledge the other's proximity too directly. Representatives of the Night's Watch stand apart in their blacks, lean and weathered, men who have watched the world's politics with the particular patience of those who know that what waits beyond the wall cares nothing for any of it. And from the east, carried across the narrow sea, and then up through the politics of the South on something very close to trust. A delegation bearing the three-headed dragon of House Targaryen. Daenerys herself waits at Dragonstone. Her dragons wait east of Blackwater Bay. This too was deliberate. This too was Ned's architecture. 3 weeks. That is how long it takes. 3 weeks of argument, of grievance performed and grievance sincere, of old debts raised and old wounds reopened and old alliances tested against new realities. There are moments in the second week when the whole arrangement threatens to collapse under the weight of Lannister pride meeting Tyrell ambition in a corridor not wide enough for both. There are moments in the third week when the Night's Watch delegation delivers its account of what moves beyond the wall with such flat, exhausted certainty that the hall goes very quiet for a very long time. And men who came to Harrenhal to argue about succession find themselves briefly remembering what they are actually arguing about time for. Ned speaks rarely. When he does, he speaks simply, in that particular register he has developed over these months. Not the voice of a Lord Paramount, not the voice of a man who wants anything for himself, but the voice of a man who has already paid the price for clarity and is now simply offering it to others at no further charge. He does not argue for Daenerys. He argues for a structure that makes the next Daenerys and the next king after her and the king after that survivable. He says, at one point during the second week, that the question is not who should rule Westeros. The question is whether Westeros should survive long enough to be ruled by anyone at all. He does not finish the thought further. He does not need to. The charter takes shape slowly, the way stone is shaped, by the removal of everything that cannot hold weight. Daenerys Targaryen will be queen. Her claim is oldest, her character tested by fire, literal and figurative. Her willingness to come to this table, rather than simply burn it, the most eloquent argument in her favor. But she will be queen within a structure that restores the authority of the great houses, that makes the High Council a genuine instrument of governance, rather than decorative furniture around a throne, and that enshrines in writing something Westeros has never had written before. That when a succession is disputed, the dispute belongs to a great council, not to whichever claimant fields the largest army. It is not a perfect document. Perfect documents do not survive contact with the men who must live under them, but it is honest, and it is durable, and it is remarkably signed. Jon Snow stands before the council on the final day with a particular quality of stillness that those who know him recognize as the absence of performance. His parentage has been revealed. Aegon Targaryen, son of Rhaegar, heir to a claim that in another world became the engine of catastrophe. He looks out at the assembled lords and says, quietly and without drama, that he declines it. Not because he doubts the name, not because he fears what it would cost, but because the North needs him, and the Wall needs him, and what comes from beyond the Wall will not be discouraged by any title a council can bestow. He says he will take the North as his responsibility. He says he will hold the line. He says he asks for nothing in exchange. The hall is very quiet. Some of the lords look at Ned. Ned looks at Jon. Something passes between them that is not quite pride and not quite sorrow, but occupies the precise space between those two things where fathers and sons tend to live. The Targaryen delegation sends word to Dragonstone that same evening. Daenerys reads the terms in a room overlooking the sea, the dragons circling somewhere in the dark above the water. their wing beats felt more than heard. The Crownlands as her personal domain, a seat on the High Council, her dragons pledged as communal defense, their fire belonging not to a conqueror, but to a realm. She reads it twice. She walks to the window. She stands there for a long time. What Essos never gave her was not a throne. What Essos never gave her was a place that required her to stay. She picks up the quill. The raven carrying her answer leaves Dragonstone before dawn, flying northwest through a sky just beginning to go pale, carrying in its small dark body the weight of an agreement that will reshape the known world. It is somewhere over the bay, wings moving with that tireless mechanical certainty that ravens have. When, far to the north, beyond the wall, beyond the ranges, something shifts in the dark in a way that has nothing to do with any council's deliberations. The cold deepens, the trees go still, and in the camps of the Night's Watch, men who have been sleeping wake without knowing why and look north and feel the particular quality of dread that has no politics in it. The raven flies on. It does not know what it carries toward. It knows only the direction it was given, and it follows it without hesitation. And somewhere ahead, a queen is waiting for an answer she has already decided to accept. The raven flies on through the pale northern dark, and somewhere below it, a man who was once a ghost of himself turns his horse toward home. Ned Stark declines everything they offer him. He does it quietly, which is the only way he has ever known how to decline anything. The titles are proposed with ceremony and refused without it. He sits in the council's final hours like a man who has already left the room, his attention directed somewhere else entirely, somewhere far to the north, where the snow falls without political consequence, and the stones of Winterfell hold their silence the way they have always held it, not as emptiness, but as patience. When the last parchment is rolled and the last seal is pressed, he rises, offers what courtesy is owed, and walks out of the hall into the open air of a morning that asks nothing of him. Sansa rides on his left. She has learned to wear her stillness like armor, and it suits her now in a way it never did when it was first forced upon her. Then it was a survival. Now it is a choice. And the difference between those two things is the difference between a cage and a wall. She watches the road ahead with eyes that have seen too much of the world's capacity for cruelty to be surprised by it, and yet there is something in the way she holds herself on horseback, something in the angle of her chin when the wind comes up from the south, that belongs entirely to the girl who once embroidered dragons by firelight and believed in songs. Arya comes to them at Harrenhal. She is simply there one morning, leaning against the outer wall in the gray pre-dawn, her arms folded, watching the gates with an expression that suggests she has been watching them for some time and has found the exercise only mildly interesting. She is harder than she was, quieter in a way that has nothing to do with silence and everything to do with depth, as though she has gone somewhere very far inside herself and found, to her own surprise, that she likes it there. She carries herself with the particular economy of someone who has learned not to waste motion, not to waste words, not to waste anything. Ned looks at her for a long moment. She looks back. Neither of them finish the sentence that would have explained what they both already understand. He opens his arms. She crosses the distance between them without hurrying, and that is all. Catelyn waits for them a half-day's ride north of Harrenhal, and when the four of them are together at last beneath an open sky, that stretches in every direction without walls or politics or consequence, there is no great ceremony to it. There is simply the fact of it. 4 people who belong to each other, who were separated by the machinery of a world that does not particularly care what people belong to, who are now in the same place at the same time beneath the same sky. The horses move slowly. No one is in a hurry. The road north is long, and they take it as it comes. And the silence between them is not the silence of grief or distance, but the older, quieter silence of people who have run out of the need to explain themselves to each other. Jon arrives at Winterfell separately, as he has always moved through the world, at an angle to it, slightly apart, watching from the edge of things. He finds Ned in the Godswood as the last light of an autumn afternoon filters down through the heart tree's canopy in long red shafts, and for a time, they simply stand together beside the pool where the dark water holds its perfect stillness, and the carved face in the pale wood watches them both with its ancient, patient expression. Ned speaks. He has been carrying these words for a very long time. Longer, in some sense, than Jon has been alive. And they come out of him not as revelation or confession, but as the simple, exhausted unburdening of a truth that was always too heavy to hold alone. He speaks of Lyanna. He speaks of Rhaegar. He speaks of a tower in Dorne, and a promise made in heat and grief, and the particular kind of love that a brother carries for a sister who has already been lost when he finds her. He does not perform the telling. He simply tells it. Jon is silent for a very long time afterward. The Godswood holds them both in that silence, the rustle of leaves, the faint movement of water, the breathing of a world that does not have opinions about what men discover in quiet places. Then Jon speaks, and the question he asks is not the question a man asks when he is thinking about thrones. It is the question a son asks. Did she love him, he asks, and the asking of it strips everything else away. The politics and the bloodlines and the weight of 2 dynasties, until there's only a young man standing in a Godswood wanting to know if he came from something real. Ned answers without hesitation. She chose him. He says it simply. She chose him. Jon receives this. He nods once, slowly, the way a man nods when something that has been unsteady inside him finally finds its footing. He does not raise the matter again. Not that evening. Not ever. The snow comes in the night. By morning, it has blanketed everything. The yards, the battlements, the peaked rooftops, and the old stones and the bare branches of the trees beyond the walls. In that particular silence that only snow creates, a silence that is not absence of sound, but the presence of something that absorbs it, that softens the world's hard edges until everything seems to exist at one remove from urgency. Ned stands upon the battlements as the dawn comes up, a slow gray brightening that turns gold at its edges, where the sun finds the clouds and burns through them, and he looks down at the yard below, where his family moves through the morning. Arya has challenged Sansa to something that Sansa has accepted with an expression of supreme skepticism and private delight. Catelyn watches them from the steps with her arms folded against the cold, and after a moment, she says something that makes Sansa laugh. A real laugh, unguarded, the laugh of someone who has decided the world has earned it. And the sound of it rises up through the cold air to where Ned stands and reaches him before he has prepared himself to hear it. He stands very still. The day after his execution should have been the end of his story. It was designed to be the end of his story. The steps, the crowd, the sword, the silence, all of it pointed in one direction, toward a conclusion that the world had already written and was simply waiting to deliver. He had knelt on those stones and made his peace with it, or something close enough to peace that he could not distinguish the difference. And then, and this is the part that still feels like standing at the edge of a very high place and looking down, he had not ended. The gods, or fate, or whatever name one gives to the forces that move through the world beneath all its politics and strategies and human plans, had handed him back to himself with a second morning and no explanation. He had not been given a throne. He had not been given legend or triumph, or the particular satisfaction of watching the right people answer for what they had done. What he had been given was this: the chance to stand on a battlement in the snow and listen to his daughter laugh in the yard below. The chance to speak a long-held truth in a god's wood and watch it be received with grace. The chance to ride north on a road that led somewhere worth arriving. The chance, which is rarer than any crown, to be present for the life he had once lost before it was finished. His debt to the old gods, if it was ever his to repay, is repaid. The snow falls in slow-turning silence across the rooftops and the stones and the wide cold sky above Winterfell, and Ned Stark stands in the first light of morning and breathes it in, and for the first time in longer than he can accurately remember, there is nothing in him that does not belong exactly where it is. And this brings us to the end of this alternate history. If you enjoyed exploring how events might have unfolded differently, I'd really appreciate it if you subscribe to the channel. We dive into new stories from the world of Westeros every single day, imagining the choices, battles, alliances, and destinies that could have completely changed the fate of the Seven Kingdoms. I'd also love to hear your thoughts. What do you think would have happened next? Did this version of history end better than the original? Or would you have taken the story in a completely different direction? Leave your ideas in the comments, because many of the best future stories come directly from your suggestions. Thank you so much for watching and for spending your time with me. I'll see you tomorrow with another alternate history from Westeros. Until then, peace out.